Well, thank you everybody for joining this month's webinar. I can't believe that we just ended our AI workshop session already a month ago. Like the year is going so fast. Today, I am so excited to bring you Pat Tabor of Swan Mountain Consulting Group. He's talking about something really important, and that's transition planning for your tour business. He's done similar presentations at America Outdoors Conference, and it's always been a really good hit. We've had amazing feedback, and I thought it'd be really valuable for you guys to hear it. Now, this is a little bit different. He already told me that it's different than what he gave at America Outdoors Conference, but it's going to be just as good. Our goal at Resmark isn't just to provide a booking software or marketing solution. Really, it's to educate you on all aspects to really help you grow and direct you in the right places. That's why we're really, really grateful to have industry experts like Pat on to chat with you. And just some background on Pat and why you should listen to him. After purchasing his first outfitting business, Pat realized that a lot of traditional advisors lacked an understanding of the tour space. He leveraged his background as a former partner at a major accounting firm and became a resource for all others in the industry navigating similar challenges that he had. He brings a combination of financial expertise and tour business experience. So through Swan Mountain Consulting Group, Pat works with outfitters, tour operators, and adventure brands, helping them plan strategically, maximize value, and exit with confidence. And again, Pat, we're so grateful to have you on. I'm excited to listen to what you have to say at any time. If you guys have questions, drop them in the chat. If we don't have time to cover them, I'll make sure I'll make sure Pat sees them and we'll get them addressed. And with that being said, Pat, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks so much for Nikki. I really appreciate that. And what I want to do is head on back up here to my top. Let's see here. There we go. I'll tell you, if I could just get 10% of Nikki's energy, I'm going to live till like 175. It's been such a delight to work with her and get planned for this. I got to apologize in front. I am going to fly through some pretty heavy duty material, and I don't want anybody to get concerned about that. But the reality is, to do this topic properly, I really want to do it right. So if we can't get to your questions, we'll write them all down and I'll get back to you separately and we'll get through this thing. So I'll go through a real brief introduction, and then I want to introduce what I consider to be almost a brand new perspective, and that is looking at transition through the lens of the life cycle of a business. And then we're going to get into a little bit about how you value businesses, and then kind of what the problems that people encounter, and pull some conclusions. Sorry, for some reason my down arrow isn't working very well, so I gotta use my mouse. But anyway, so as Nikki indicated, I formed Swan Mountain Consulting Group. I was working for RSM as an executive partner. I retired, did the logical thing, went from international accounting into outfitting. That's a joke in case anybody cared to listen to that. But at any rate, had a great career as an outfitter, transitioned my business back in 2019 to my adult children. And I actually rejoined RSM for another 6 years. I just couldn't get enough, I guess. And I retired as the national practice leader of RSM, running their transition and advisory group. And so got even more in-depth experience and added it on to what I have. And now I'm just completely focused on the outdoor recreation industry. ORCs is what I like to call them, and focused on helping people with a variety of different topics, but transition is probably at the top of the list. If I'm doing a good job, sorry for this, it's hard for me to do it through my mouse. I want to look through that lens to figure out how to see let you see your business through this lens, and how that framework can start to create the conversations internally about how you want to contemplate any form of transition. And then I want to segue into making a business case for the way you would approach any kind of transition process through some pretty careful planning and preparation. So I've been working with closely held businesses for many years, and I've watched a lot of things happen through succession planning or exit planning. There's a lot of different names that folks give this process. Business succession oftentimes comes with a perspective that you're going to keep it in a family and you're going to pass it down through generation. But that isn't only necessarily the case. Sometimes you go to management. Exit planning often contemplates that you're going to sell. You're going to sell to a third party unrelated entity. And so there's so many different definitions of what transition means. I just kind of want to put those aside and just focus on the word transition, and that can come in a variety of different forms. But what I've realized with every single client that I've dealt with, they're at a different place in time for themselves uniquely. And so there is no like template, there is no specific application where you just say, hey, follow this and it's going to really work well for you. You have to uniquely taper the situation to where that company and those owners are at. And so when you start to delve into this process, you realize there's a lot of change that usually has to take place when a company's contemplating transition. And the magnitude of some of that change can just almost overwhelm you. Just take it on. And so this scares people, and so what do they do? The natural thing, you put it on the back burner and you get back to work and you do, and you kick that can down the road. And so I have found that a lot of business owners spin their wheels with regards to what happens with transition. And so what's the end result? Ultimately, transition turns into either a disappointing event or a failure. So what I want to do is look at some observations about transition. One thing folks have to understand is that exit is just really only one transition point for a business owner. There are several transition or inflection points throughout the life cycle of a business. And each one of them is fraught with significant challenges as you go through the process of the life cycle of a business. And so it's critical to understand where you're at in what phase of the company so that you know the proper application and measures you're going to have to take in order to conduct an orderly transition, whatever that transition might be. If you don't address these transition points, it almost always leads to an unsuccessful outcome, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So what are the transition points, and how can you guys recognize them, and how can you better prepare for them? Well, what I want to do is look at the different things that are required for an enterprise to understand where they're at in a journey. And also accept and understand the reality that the magnitude of that change is going to be challenging for you as owners. And there's probably no lonelier place than to be an owner, because you don't really have a lot of people to turn to that have a deepened understanding of just kind of the trials and tribulations you have to get through. But some of the things that go through people's mind, and I hear this all the time, how do I get ready for a transition event? Do I have the right talent? Should I sell it to the management team? They're loyal people. They've done me right. Should I sell to them? Who's going to give me the maximum value? I've been doing a lot of valuation work on recreation companies. The values come in really high, and most people think, I'll never get this. Nobody's going to give me this money for this business. Or what price can I expect? What am I going to do with my time? This is a big issue now, especially for baby boomers, because this generation has difficulty letting go and is used to being active. And so when they come crashing off of an exit, they don't know what to do with all their found time. They really don't. And so there's almost a need to really plan for what's next in terms of what you're going to do to keep yourself active and still going. And do I have enough money? This is a key question that I often ask people. Do you even know what your needs are post-transition? Have you quantified that? And how does it fold into the rest of your financial plan? And again, once you start addressing these things, the frustration and lack of progress really starts to kick in. So we created this lens of looking at both the business and their owners through this journey and trying to understand how the business climate and both internal and external influences affect it. And for those of you that have gone to business school, you're going to kind of recognize this particular drawing because it's I think a core component of any strategy course anywhere in any university system. But it creates a good framework for us, and we could refer to it as the life cycle of a business. So there's distinct stages of the life cycle. You know, most of you, if you started off, you started the company up, you launched it, you then grew like crazy. You finally got into an area of maturity, and then for many companies, there's that final stage of considering exiting. And throughout each of these stages, there's certain components or certain attributes that really define that you know that you're in that particular phase of the life cycle. So when we start up, we're in the beginning. It's before any existence of things. So you're creating the conceptual framework, and you're trying to understand what is the unique deliverable that you're going to create. Once you launch and you're operational, you start to create business models, and you start automatically from the start running into cash concerns. And those cash concerns don't go away for a while. As you grow, you start to solidify the business. Many times, especially in recreation, you can go through these spurts of hypergrowth where all of a sudden, boom, you know, you just accelerate, and then it comes down. And so there's a lot of outside influences that impact growth and stability in your sales. And then you start really methodically going after different types of expansion, whether it's geographically, through products, through acquisitions, or whatever. As we mature, then you may still be growing, but you're starting to focus now on your infrastructure, cost cutting, and getting more efficient. This is a period of time that a lot of companies try to re-energize, but there is a desired feature, basically, of stability. Like, you know, we've kind of finally arrived, we're stable. And then in the final stage, you know, the end stage, we're not into investing anymore. What we're really looking at is trying to prevent a downward spiral before the owner's exit. So to understand this framework, you got to understand that the progression is not always linear. You can jump back and forth, but it is directional. So you're either on the way up or on the way down, you know, and it's very complex in terms of how you shift from one of these cycles to one of these phases within the cycle to the next. And it doesn't happen in unison. Like, you could be mature in certain aspects of your business and be in almost startup stage in other aspects. So getting all the elements of your business to synchronize in any one particular phase is very, very challenging. And we often see this when we're dealing with companies that are in between the growth and maturity stage. They're showing signs of maturity, but they are absolutely struggling to get all of their systems caught up. And again, the thing I really want to emphasize is each enterprise is unique. So there is no one size fits all. And that's why it's so critical to really understand your own situation. So it is very important then, as we understand this framework, to link it to value. Because the number one question I get when I'm dealing with companies that are transitioning is, how do I know what I'm worth? And how do I value my company? And that it comes from a perspective of understanding what results really drive value and what value there is when somebody from the outside looks to potentially either acquire you or take you over. Once you understand the drivers of value, then you're in a position to anticipate what kind of changes you'll need to make in the road ahead. And then that way you can really get on board with driving value for the specific purpose of maximizing it through some event in the future. I refer to that as company readiness. And when I come in and do an assessment of transition for a company, that's the first thing I'm trying to do is, how ready is this company for any form of transition? Because if you enter into transition prior to your stage of readiness, bad things typically happen, and we'll cover some of those. So what are the things that drive value? Well, as you know, all businesses are comprised of systems, departments, functions, and they all interconnect, both individually, and then they collectively have a direct impact on success. So Each one of those drivers progress as you move through the life cycle, and but not all at the same time and not at equal measure. That's what the point I was trying to make before. So often what happens, especially during the growth phase, you start shifting upwards, but some of those key areas don't get proper attention and focus and they lag behind. And what I see most often is this is when a buyer will penalize a seller because a lot of their systems or the core elements that drive value have lagged behind. And so now the seller perceives that they have to invest in your organization in order to get the kind of value they need out of it. And so anticipating that and trying to thwart that from before you go into transition is a critical strategic move. So here are all the value drivers. I've developed proprietarily a way to measure each of these drivers. But basically, these are the things that drive value in a recreation business: leadership and management, finance, planning, infrastructure, and technology, becoming more and more important, by the way. And this is why it's so pertinent to have partners like Resmark and all that, because it drives value in the business. If you have a recreation company that doesn't have a fully integrated solution in the technology arena, especially as it integrates customer attraction all the way through to financial statements, you're at a disadvantage and a buyer is going to penalize you for that. I can guarantee it. I see it happen all the time. People, of course, is critically important: operations and product development or service development, and then sales and management. So some of the things that are really important in each of these categories are, for instance, in leadership, what are the characteristics of the and skill sets of the leaders? This is where family succession becomes challenging, because sometimes that next generation doesn't have the personal characteristics and the skill sets needed to lead the organization. That becomes a crisis within a family. So that's very important. When you look at some of the other drivers like financial, the funding, the utilization of capital, how much capital is required. I have a fishing lodge up in Alaska that is so infrastructure heavy. And when you think about the cost of those boats and you think of the cost of how much has to be sourced and how difficult it is to get in remote Alaska, you realize how intense the capital must be relative to that type of a business. And then the challenges that puts forth when you're trying to transition. When you look at things like people, what kind of resource skills are they going to need, and what's your attraction and retention policy? The single biggest challenge of recreation business is seasonality and the ability to attract and retain, especially as we shift gears now and we have a new economy and we have a new perspective from the workforce that heretofore we haven't had those kind of challenges in trying to staff. And the issues of equity and incentives and benefits has become really key over the last decade as new generations come into the workforce. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and tell you, so now we've kind of understood the fact that the business has these value drivers, but just as importantly, so does the owner. And one of the things that I see as a major failure in transition planning is the business kind of tries to plan its transition, but fails to really recognize the importance of the transition planning for the owner itself. And there's so many issues that affect both the business and the owner. So I want to just touch a little bit about the owner. And what it really comes down to is understanding their life cycle. Now, it's a little bit simpler, because what really happens, and I think most of us that have been entrepreneurs can relate to this, there's that early stage where you're very entrepreneurial, you're driven by ideas and energy and everything else. Then you go through the pain and agony of growing that and accumulating it. And then once you finally arrive, now you're trying to figure out how to secure it and transfer it in a way that gives you the rewards you've earned in a fashion that seems fair. So, I'm so sorry. It's like I feel like one of those jet fighters with a joystick, and I can't quite get the touchdown right. Sorry about that. So on the top of this chart, you see how the life cycle works for the business. Now, parallel to it is how I've implanted the life cycle for the owner. And so you can see how the early growth accumulation And there's, again, key transition points at the individual or ownership level as there are in the business. And so in that early stage, we're looking at wealth alignment and getting the funds necessary to launch. So there's very little net worth, and your assets are typically not liquid. Then as you go through growth and accumulation, you start generating cash. It gets highly complex, but this is the time where people start achieving fairly high net worth, and your goals start to expand beyond just the ownership of the company, or if they haven't, they should. So you should be looking at wealth management strategies outside just the conduct of your business. And then in the last stage, where you're approaching retirement, you're now should be focused on, okay, what do I do with a business, and planning its transition. And then to the extent that family is of significance to you, what do I want to create in the way of family legacy? And what do I want to achieve in the form of wealth transfer? So parallel to what we had in businesses, the owner personal wealth drivers are financial planning, investment advisory, personal risk management becomes super critical, to start measuring, especially as you transition in the late, because now you have to protect what you've built up. Your charitable planning, your personal tax planning, and your estate planning. So you can see this is a complex environment. This isn't as simple as just saying, "Oh, I sell the business, I've got some cash, I'm going to live off the cash." No, I wish it was that simple. And now it becomes even more complex because people are living longer. And so the issues of long-term health care and your entire healthcare needs become very, very critical for your future financial planning. So there has to be an assessment of readiness parallel to the assessment of readiness for a business for the owners. Just how ready are they for any kind of transition? Have they done any financial planning? How in alignment are their investments outside the company with their investments inside the company? Because that becomes fairly critical in understanding your stage of readiness and whether you can even pull off a transition right now. And what is the likelihood of that you're going to actually reach your objectives of personal wealth management? So if you tie it all together, this is what the journey looks like. You're climbing and then you're descending. And in its simplest form, it just looks like, wow, this is easy. We'll just build it up and then sell it off. But as you can see with all these inflection points, you need to be planning all the way along the line. And if I'm trying to emphasize one thing, is exit planning doesn't begin with the day you decide you want to leave. Exit planning should have started years ago, and it should build up so that when you are ready to exit, that it has the attributes that you have applied all this kind of precursor behavior to really maximize value and maximize the opportunity. So it's going in the direction you always wanted it to go. So when we look at transition, you just got to understand the statistics aren't particularly good. If you look at the Family Firm Institute, only 30% of family businesses survive into the second generation. That's second gen. So, and it's even worse when you go to third gen. Just it's deplorable. So the question is, well, why is that? We're going to get to that. Nearly half of all family businesses, so this is 43%, have no succession plan in place. Isn't that astounding? And even though 70% of the businesses would like to pass their business on to the next generation, they haven't really got a plan to do that. And I'm telling you, planning from going one generation to the next is not an easy process. How come? Well, poor planning. They don't use the right kind of advisors. There's ample family conflict. Even the best families, healthiest families have conflict. You can't be a family and not have conflict. Don't we all know that? And so when you mix family with business, it's like, oh man, put on your seatbelt because this is going to get fun. I'm sure some of you, if you haven't watched it, you've heard about the show Succession. I think it's on HBO or Max and all that. And they, of course, take it to the absolute level of absurdity. It's like, can these people be any more dysfunctional than they are? But the reality is, underlying all that is the tone of the core behaviors that siblings have towards each other, and disdain that oftentimes kids have towards a patriarch or matriarch because of what it's been like growing up in this family. And I run into this all the time, certainly not to the magnitude of craziness on that TV show, but I'll tell you, I've got stories if you want to hear them. So there are different visions of generation, and this is really becoming the case now, especially as the Z generation enters in. Um, what they consider to be success and what they want to achieve in their stewardship of the company is so drastically different than what the founders want, that oftentimes that might be the deal killer as to whether succession will occur. So understanding those visions and trying to reconcile them is critical in the planning process. Too often, these next generations lack the fundamental financial education to really understand the complexity of their businesses. Recreation financial planning is not easy. People think, oh yeah, well, you take people on tours, you bring in the money, and then you pay your people, and you're done, right? And you got a big bag of money at the end of the season. Wouldn't it be cool if it was really actually that way? We all know that it isn't. There's some complexities, especially if you have capital interplay. How many times have all of you eaten, in the startup stages, spaghetti, 5 nights in a row because your resources are pretty strained because the cash flows off during the off season. So helping people understand the financial environment is super, super critical. And do they have the right leadership skills? Oftentimes under the school of trial and error, or the school of hard knocks, a lot of founders feel like, they have this sixth instinct or behavior where they just kind of instinctually know what makes their business tick. And they're very frustrated when the next generation just seems to lack what appears to be common sense to run this business in a certain fashion. So the question is, where did that come from? What kind of skills do we need to get to folks to make them effective leaders to fill those shoes? And then what it always seems to be the case especially in families, is the inadequate funding of any kind of buyout strategy. And if there's not enough funding, then it starts putting a strain on everybody. So one of the issues that I run into a lot when it comes to succession with families is everybody's mad at dad. And I say this tongue in cheek, but having been a father that went through succession about 6 years ago, I thought I had it nailed. I mean, hell, I do this for a living. So I got all the right answers, right? Wrong. Every mistake you could have probably made as a parent in succession planning, I actually did. And I'm both a little bit ashamed to say that, but at the same time, I'm proud to say it because it helped me a lot be a better consultant as a result of going through it literally myself. And the thing that really caught me was, number one, being too emotionally attached to the business. I worked my ass off to build this business up. And when I was going through transition, they were already contemplating changes that in my heart of hearts it hurt my feelings. It was like, like they talked about changing the logo. I love that logo. I don't want you to change the logo, but they're thinking contemporary. They're thinking of taking it to the next level. And I didn't realize the emotional impact I was going to have. So if you're on the other end of that, have a little empathy for dad, because, mom and dad did what they had to do. And now you're the benefactors and you get to take it to another level, but just be empathetic about it. Too many times I come across dads where they have an unrealistic value of business, and what they're trying to do is monetize sweat equity. When you've worked your tail off to build a business up, you just naturally feel like this thing's worth a fortune. But unfortunately, the math don't lie. And so in the extent where you have math telling you one thing and dad saying, oh, it's got to be worth more than that, that becomes problematic. Understanding the importance of a committed management and leadership team. I have one client, and the biggest obstacle for selling it right now is that they cannot consistently hold on to management, not because they're bad people or difficult to work with, but because the location is so challenging, it's so remote, and it's such a sacrifice to go work for an enterprise of that nature. And that is a reality of that business. It's such an extraordinary business, and it provides phenomenal service and recreation. but it is remote and it's challenging to staff. Dad, if he isn't thinking about this right, he's probably not thought about what life looks like after he exits the business. One of the more gripping terms that I've been using with a lot of my transition clients is if you're 65, think of it from this frame perspective. You only have 15 summers left. Now that seems kind of drastic, but think about it in terms of what your health is and what your capability to travel and everything else. So we know that once you get past the age of 70, at differing levels, travel becomes more challenging, either physically or it just exhausts you. Like I've been traveling a lot lately, and I find I only have about one or two, European trips a year in me, and then I'm just so exhausted. It takes longer and longer to recover just as I age. And so if you only have 15 summers left, what are you going to do with those 15 summers? What are you going to do? Is it your desire to work until you drop? There are those people in this generation that feel like the only way they define their happiness is through work. I think that's kind of sad. I'm pretty sure there has been nobody that grabbed the priest by the lapels, brought him down while he was laying on the slab and say, I wish I would have worked more. Most people wake up and say, gosh, I don't have much time. Or how many people have witnessed where somebody exited their career or their business, and then a few years later, they die, and they never really got to enjoy the fruits of their labor. So I'm challenging anybody out there that's my age to think about what do you want to be when you grow up, and start planning post-transition, because you need to have something else to sink your teeth in to whatever that might be. The other thing I find is there is a tremendous amount of avoidance of family issues. It's like, you close your eyes and you cover your ears and pretend that it doesn't exist. But unless you tackle those things face on, they don't go away by themselves. And putting it on the back burner, kicking the can down the road doesn't work. And then the other thing is not figuring out what things are bothersome and not cleaning it up. You got to clean stuff up. If you know stuff isn't going to work, I can't tell you how many things I come along and they say, well, there is this one issue we have. It's like, okay, describe this one issue, clean it up. That's what readiness is all about. You got to clean up some of these bothersome issues. One of the things, and I always make this a point when I'm at AO and everything else, is once you're an entrepreneur and you've brought on a team, you got to stop working in the business. You got to work on the business, not in the business. Oh, I love to get behind the oars, or I love to run a trip. Well, don't we all? That's probably what attracted you to it. Sorry. But the reality is somebody needs to have the bigger picture in mind. You have to start thinking strategically, especially as you take into account those life cycle inflection points. And if you're not watching that, who is? And how do you know that you're ever going to get yourself ready unless you get after it? And once again, I see a lot of people in an overwhelmed state. Like it hurts your head to think about it. So it's just best not to think about it and get back to work. So what are some of the economic issues? I'm running into a lot of challenges related to buying versus gifting. So in a perfect world, especially right now, and I don't know how this, as we speak today, I don't know where Congress is going to come out in the preservation of a very high exemption level for gifting. Currently, you can gift up to $18 million as an individual, $37 million as a couple of your estate to your heirs without any tax consequence to them or to you. And this is beyond the $18,000 a year per person gifting level that you can just give. So that is scheduled to sunset at the end of 25, and then it drops down to whatever was the cost of living rated level that existed before they jumped it up to this high level. Again, unclear as to what Congress is going to do and whether that sunset will be lifted. But if it's not, it drops down to something like 4 million, 5 million. Nobody's quite sure exactly. I haven't seen a calculation of it. That becomes an issue then with relative to gifting. So I have some clients that like, hey, my dad made me buy, so I'm making my kids buy. It's just as simple as that. And then I have other dads and moms that say, the hell with that. I want to see them succeed. I didn't work my whole life to, try to extract things out of my kids. And so I'm going to set them up for success. As long as we have some form of reasonable funding that takes care of us in our senior years, we want to see the kids succeed. And I got everything in between. So this is one of the things you're going to have to sort out. Where do you lie on that scale? What is your retirement funding needs? And can you wait to a death event? Because, by the way, if you set up a proper trust, and most people don't realize this, if you have a will, you do not avoid probate if you own real estate. It's maybe in a couple of states, but most of the states, a will is not enough. You do have to have a trust. You have to have a trust if you own significant real estate. I'm telling you that right now. And the most important thing that can happen is, there's some other technical ways to hold real estate, but the long and the short of it is, if you have a married couple, they put the real estate in a trust along with other assets. Upon the first death, all the basis of your real estate adjusts up to the then fair market value. This is critical. So if you've been aggressive and you've been writing off all your business assets and your real estate and everything else, that means your basis is very low. So when anybody goes to sell that property, they're going to have a massive gain. But if you put it in a trust and then one of you dies, the basis goes up to the then fair market value. If they sell it the day after that death, they have no gain. No gain, no tax, no nothing. That's how important planning through trust and estate planning is, and how it intertwines with transition planning. So understanding the tax ramifications, understanding about stock redemptions and how they work, and should parents buy out or kids buy out parents. What can the company afford in the way of outflowing cash where you don't rob the business of its necessary working capital? And then also really assessing just how big does this company need to be? Under the leadership arena, who does succeed the CEO? And does that person have the skills? What effect will this have on other members of the family? I worked with one family where the third generation was being docketed to come in. And to the person, they said, if this one son is put in charge, we'll lose our entire staff. That's how poorly this one individual is thought of by most of the people in the organization. And he was going to be the heir apparent. So we had to do some pretty substantial workarounds because of that. This is real life. This is what happens. If they don't have the requisite skills now, what are you going to do? I was interested to see that there was a request through American Outdoors today that went out today about additional topics to be spoke on. And one of the things that the educational committee came up with is they really want to understand succession planning as it relates to leadership. I think it's fantastic. In fact, I threw my hat in the ring to talk about that because I've done a lot of leadership development for CEOs and partners and everything else. And it's the necessity of building their skill. And one thing I'll say about leadership development, just know that there's two elements of it. There's the competency element, which means, are they competent in the areas of finance and all the technical aspects of running the business, but also where's their character at and where's their character development at? And good leadership development programs work on both competency and character. And then what other holes are going to get created? When I left my company, because of my financial background, it necessitated the company hiring somebody with a financial background because none of my kids have that. And so we have to understand what holes are created when founders and different folks leave. And then finally, can the successors get along? I mean, you have to really dig deep and search your soul as to whether or not it's fair to set up kids who used to throw stuff at each other across the table, whether they can now play nice and run a multi-million-dollar business together. Lots of emotional issues around this. I think you know this. A lot of times families don't talk about it. This is especially driven by cultural, geographical areas, by ethnic areas. Like the classic we always used to say is, you know, in the Midwest, if you're a Protestant male, we don't talk about our feelings. We just don't. You know, you don't know what dad thinks. You probably haven't heard dad say, I love you, you know. So this is real life in families, and you have to be tackling these emotional issues. And right now, it is not uncommon in larger, more complex family transition and succession plans to actually have family counseling as part of the solution to make sure we have a successful transition. How are we going to support mom and dad? Um, Jimmy, you know, being the second in command, he doesn't have it, but nobody's willing to say that to him, and people are actually willing to watch a multi-million-dollar succession plan go under play, knowing that the heir apparent is not ready for it and perhaps doesn't even want it. So lots of emotional issues, lots of them. So what's the pathway to success? One of the things that I found is really helpful, if you do have kids and you think they're going to be part of your succession plan, it really is helpful to have them go work other places and get an exposure to the world and get an education. They're just going to come back more valuable, if that's even in the cards. But I've seen a lot of second gen people right now that are coming back in their late 30s or I should say late 20s, early 30s into being 40, where they've gone ahead and spent 5, 10, 8, you know, almost 15 years somewhere else. And they're coming back into the family business. And that oftentimes can be very, very valuable because they bring a different perspective and outside views, which are very important. The other thing that I think is pretty critical is don't put family members in positions that they really aren't qualified to run. That is a big no-no. It erodes the confidence that the rest of the organization has in you. I think they refer to this most often as nepotism, and it's really not healthy if the person isn't qualified to do what you've tasked them to do. It's very important that you communicate the behavioral expectations up front. It is critical that you let that individual know what your expectations are. The bar should be, quite frankly, higher because they do have the family connection, and so there's a higher expectation. And make sure that you get independent reporting relationships going here so that you keep the system honest. It's important to keep confidentiality sacred. I can't tell you how many secrets about a family are revealed in a family business. And it's very awkward because you listen to stuff. It's like seeing a really good soap opera or maybe a really bad soap opera. More important than anything else is make the tough calls. If you can't employ a family member for the right reasons because they're not qualified, the answer should be no, even though that's going to cause a little, you know, consternation. It's important. And too often I've seen people trying to compensate for their mistakes as being a parent by thinking that they're now being a good parent by putting a person in a position they don't deserve. Don't do that. And then once you have decided, get out of their way. Let the next generation have their head. You know, don't stand in their way for success. So I think the challenge is to really create a successful transition is to try to figure out what's best for you, what's best for the company, and what's best for the next generation. Sometimes that means you're going to pass it into the family. Oftentimes it means you're not. And you have to be willing and have the intestinal fortitude to understand that. And I can't emphasize enough the importance to bring on the right kind of professionals. And what I mean by that is if you've been surrounded by lifelong friends that have served as your CPA or attorney and all that, that's great. They may be good friends, or you may have an investment advisor that tells you what stocks to buy. But make sure you get into the arena where people actually know how to do this. This is a unique skill set, and not everybody knows how to do it. Sorry, my twitchy finger. So, what are the ways that you can improve your success? Work with a transition planning specialist to get a plan and think of it in 5-year increments. So it takes a good solid 5 years for company readiness and owner readiness to be paralleled where you can really do that. That seems crazy, I know, but long-term planning ensures success. Short-term planning is more reactionary. If you do have a designated successor leader, put them in executive coaching and leadership development today, because you need to get them prepped for that role. And again, don't be afraid to seek the assistance of a family business psychologist. These are very valuable people. The money is well worth it. You got to work in the advanced arena of financial planning and CPA work. So your standard CPA typically does not do estate planning, and they are not certified as a financial planner. Those are two specialty areas that branch off from being a CPA. In fact, the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, created the Certified Financial Planner credential for the sole purpose of allowing professionals to actually pursue expertise in comprehensive financial planning. That's very different than being an auditor or a tax return preparer. The estate and gift tax arena is very complex, especially when you intertwine the usage of trusts, the usage of charitable trusts, and the variety of different vehicles that help mitigate tax strategies and successfully transfer wealth. You need somebody with that expertise. You also need high-level financial skills like creating projections and understanding what the flow of funds would look like if you were to sell the business. I always encourage folks, depending on your size, to consider actually developing either an outside couple of board members or form an advisory board where you have the benefit of expertise of people that are really deep and steep in the skill sets you don't have as being advisors to you as an executive running your company. If you are a family business, deeply consider the process of creating two things: a family constitution and a family operating agreement, where you establish the goals and objectives and value systems of your family and how you want to not only conduct your affairs, but how you want to tackle issues like transition and conflict. And I really encourage families that are running businesses to schedule and structure family meetings and get after this, get after it frequently and thoroughly. So with that, I want to try to address any questions if you think we have time. And as I'm doing that, I will also, let's see, we got chat. Do you guys, Nikki, do you see the questions?
I don't
Do we
see
have
any
any
coming
questions?
through now, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or just drop them in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. That was awesome, Pat. A lot of great stuff.
And I am, as we're waiting for questions, going to do one more thing here. I'm going to put that up. I always encourage people to just go ahead and just snap a picture of that. That's my cell phone, my email address. If you got individual questions and you want to have me address them, no worries at all.
So we did get a question come through, Pat. What's the best valuation method for a small outfitting business? And how do you determine the multiple? And how do you find comparables?
Perfect. So what I did is I looked at the world of valuation and how it's done in virtually every line of business and by industry. And what I found for recreation, in my opinion, and it's the way I've been valuing businesses now, coming on almost 30 years, I've done about close to 500 valuations now, is what I do is I take the fair market value of the assets that are going to be transferred, and I add to it a multiple of what I call owner discretionary adjusted EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So EBITDA is the standard number that most valuation specialists will work with when they're trying to normalize a set of financial statements they're looking at for purposes of valuation. almost all sales that occur in recreation businesses are asset sales. They're not purchasing the stock or membership interest in an LLC. It means we're buying your assets. And when you buy your assets, you can't take multiples of what is the overall enterprise value, which is typically done when you see investment bank transactions and large company purchases. That's done on a multiple based on the fact that you're buying the company as is. You're literally buying the shares of stock. In recreation, you buy the assets. And so you obviously got to pay no more, no less than the fair market value of the assets. But then you're also trying to pay for the intangible value of the company. And that's oftentimes referred to as goodwill or blue sky. And the way we measure that is by taking those value drivers that I had showed before and assigning individual values to each of those value drivers on a self-assessment. So I developed a tool to create a matrix that then calculates what a proper multiple would be. And then what I've done is I've tested that multiple times through sales, both completed sales and contemplated sales, to test the effectiveness of whether that range of multiples makes sense. What I've found is in the case of recreation businesses, it stays in a relatively tight range of a low of 2 times owner discretionary adjusted EBITDA and 5 times. Now, why do I keep using this awkward term, owner discretionary adjusted EBITDA? If you're like any small business out there, you're probably running a lot of personal expenses through your company because it does 2 things. You're a slave to your company and you think you deserve it, and you're right. And second of all, it helps mitigate some of the tax bite. Everybody does it. It's not a shock. I'm not offended. Everybody knows that it happens. So, but we got to pull that out. If we want a good, clean look as to what a company's worth and what it could perform, we need EBITDA to look just like it would look if we were running this company at arm's length with no personal stuff run through the company. So that's where we take out owner discretionary items. That's a very polite way of saying me running my personal stuff through my company. Doesn't it sound better to say owner discretionary? So we pull that out, and then we get a good, clean look at EBITDA. We multiply it by the properly calculated multiple and add it to assets. And what was the second part of the question, Nikki? That hits valuation, but I think there was a follow-up.
How do you determine the multiple, and how do you find comparables?
So comparables are irrelevant. This isn't real estate. And I'm even offended by using the comp method on real estate. To me, that's laziness. Yeah, there is a value per acre and there's a value per square foot, and you add the 2 together and you get some sense of value. We know what it costs to build. We know what a cost of an acre is. But comparables, what XYZ recreation company got versus what you get, it's apples and oranges. We can't ever make the 2 comparable unless you have identical amounts of assets, identical amounts of cash flow, identical. You'd have to be the same exact company to have the same exact or comparable purchase price. So I've always been confused why people think that comparables matter, because they really don't. What this guy over here got for his business, God bless him, congratulations or condolences, but it's irrelevant to what your business is worth. Any other questions, Nikki?
Yeah,
Looks
just
like
a few more real quick. Peter asked, in today's economic environment, are you seeing more recreation business for sale?
Well, prior to, I don't know that the economic environment has much to do with it, as we have a generational shift. So us boomers just keep getting older. I hate that when that happens, but that's what's happening. So the biggest thrust behind transition right now is exiting boomers, and we've got another 4 to 5 years of it, and trillions of dollars of equity that are going to transfer hands out of boomers into someplace else, whether it's private equity or not. This current economic climate, like all economic climates, has an impact. The number one impact is always interest rates. If interest rates are high, it slows down sales. We saw a phenomenal exuberance come out of post-pandemic where people got enough cash, they figured out an exit strategy, and they wanted out. Now there's a lot of people that want out, but the deals are slowing down, and the deal horizon is extending again. So we're back to about a 3 to 5 year from the day you decide you want to sell to actually finding a viable buyer and a price you can accept.
Wow. Another question from Joe. Do you think SDE valuation is relevant?
The which valuation?
SDE valuation, is that seller's discretion?
SDE. I need more definition as to what.
So you want to unmute or?
Yeah. Hi, guys. Sorry. This is Joe. Yeah, seller's discretionary earnings. It's one that was recommended to us that we've been working with. But it sounds like maybe that's not familiar to you or is common.
Well, first of all, in all the different deals I've heard, I've never seen a valuation driven off of seller SDE, what you're saying. My guess is if I looked at how they're computing it, it probably approximates one of two things, either net present value of future cash flows or owner discretionary EBITDA. So when I do the owner discretionary EBITDA, I'm pulling out owner compensation and all things related to the owner, so I get a clean look. One could say that clean look is what are the earnings prior to distribution. So there may be equivalency between the way they're calculating it for you, Joe, versus what I'm suggesting. We would have to do a side-by-side comparison to see what the two calculations get us, and whether or not they approximate each other. My acid test for proper valuation comes down to taking what is an agreed upon purchase price and playing it back out and saying, okay, if I make this investment at this price and I get this kind of earnings, how quickly would I get my money back out of this buying this company? If it takes more than 5 years to get your money back, you're probably paying too much, and there ought to be a strategic reason why you're doing that. You bought a monopoly, you did something, you took out a competitor. If you're able to pay off the purchase of a company prior to 5 years, then the fact of the matter is you're getting a good deal and you should snap it up. 5 years is typically formulaically, if you've got all the drivers right and everything else, that's what's going to state a fair price. And once you've done that, it's very hard for a buyer to argue with that price because it's both sound and mathematically driven.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
These
And
are
Pat,
awesome.
you have a tool. Sorry, just really quick, one more thing. You have a multiplier tool that you said you developed?
Yeah. I
And
use
that's
that when I perform valuations. So it's a proprietary tool that I use when I'm doing valuations for clients when they reached out and said, hey, can you help us value our company?
Okay, cool. Great. Thanks so much.
You bet.
Awesome. Awesome questions and answers. This is great. Let's see if we can get another one in. Eric says, in this industry, sometimes the value of the assets and property might far outspace what the business could justify for the new owner. How have you seen that impact the ability to sell a business, and what are good ways to deal with that?
Spot on, Eric. And thank you for bringing it up because I didn't address it. The number one issue of facing real estate-based recreation businesses, especially in high desirable areas like the Rockies and, virtually every place where you have a brick and mortar offering and you're in a cool recreation place, the value of the real estate far outstrips the ability for a company to actually underwrite the purchase of that real estate. That's a reality. So you're valuing the real estate separately from what you're valuing the business. The business has the ability to produce a certain outcome, but that outcome doesn't necessarily mean that it can underwrite the purchase of a lodge that has 14 miles of riverfront on the San Juan, and this is what often happens is recreation companies started years ago, plowing all their money back in. They were smart. They made some very good strategic purchases, and now they're sitting on a gold mine of real estate. And when they try to sell it as a package and somebody runs the numbers and says, even if I put 50% down, I cannot purchase this whole thing. And so in that regard, you have to really bifurcate the sale and say, you're buying the business. You're gonna have to look at differently buying the real estate. And maybe there's other methods to do that, a lease back, with a first right of refusals. There's other ways we can still sell the business. And so I know I'm right at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of people's time. I can go for quite a bit of time if people want to hang on, but I'll leave that to you, Nikki, as to whether we shut down or people follow up with me or however you want to do it. Looks like there's more questions coming in.
I have people say, keep going, please.
Yeah.
As long as you have some time, Pat. Do you have like an extra 5 minutes? I want to be mindful.
I have an extra half an hour, so I'm willing to just stick with it, because this is where the real value's added, is in the questions.
Absolutely. If anybody needs to jump off, please do. The replay is going to be available by tomorrow morning. So Pat, Stevie asks, would you say this may be the greatest time to buy businesses ever because of all the boomers retiring? Are you seeing many of them are willing to make owner finance deals, equity retention deals, no money down, little money down? Any idea on what percentage of the industry is owned by baby boomers? Baby boomer question.
What an awesome question. So yes, this is the biggest transitional shift of generational business owners in our lifetime, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. So there, depending on how long the boomers lasted, measures their desperation to get out. I have seen some crazy good deals. The one thing they mentioned is, I will tell you that 100%, regardless of who's selling it, 100% of the deals have to be usually seller financed. There is no bank or financial institution out there lending money on the purchase of businesses. They will lend money on the value of real estate, maybe up to 70%. But as we know right now, the interest rates make it very difficult to purchase real estate at these high rates. So the sellers have to finance. You have to do it. The likelihood that you'll get a buyer that comes along that can take it all out in one fell swoop, that's less than 1%. I've just closed 18 transactions over the December 31st year-end timeframe. Not one of them came with outside financing. They were all seller finance. Last year I had one, and it was a private equity group. And private equity as buyers will cash you out, but they will make you pay for it. And it's a painful transaction to have them as a buyer, but they will cash you out. And by the way, if you get bought out by a private equity group, you will have to stay on for a period of time under an indentured servitude arrangement. Just know that there's a price to get your cash, and it doesn't all come at once. You have to stay on and perform and make sure that they get the return on investment. So excellent question. I think boomers are anxious to get out. A lot of them are retired. They're 10 years past what they should have exited. So I would estimate as a percentage, there's still about almost 50% of all recreation businesses or more that are still owned by boomers.
That's crazy. Peter asks, is financing more challenging today? I know banks are very tight. Are more deals being done with some owner financing? So rule of thumb, 5 years for repayment.
So like I said, banks just don't get involved. If a bank's getting involved on behalf of a buyer, it's because the buyer has collateral and other financial wherewithal that the bank can attach, because banks don't help buy going concern businesses because there's nothing to attach. If you take $1 million purchase price rafting company that has $500,000 worth of used fixed assets, a bank would come in and value that at $100,000. So if they're going to finance $1 million business and they don't base it on the purchase, or the cash flow, the most you could hope to get out of a bank is $100,000, which doesn't even probably represent the down payment. And then they're going to want first position on everything. So a bank is just not a realistic environment for a buyer to come into. It has to be done through seller financing. So what I usually like to do is structure a deal so that it's seller financed, where you make a good workable monthly payment that you know that the company can afford, because you ran the company, so you know what its cash flow capability is. So you go ahead and structure a deal, but then put a 5-year balloon on it. because then once the company builds up a reputation and can create its own relationship, at that point, it can probably go to a financial institution and take out the debt that it owes to you as the seller. But you're going to have to go into these transactions knowing that you're going to be part of the selling solution by providing financing.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Does anybody have any other questions? That was the last one for now. Pat, you're a wealth of information. I feel so grateful that you came on and spoke to our audience. So thank you so much. If anybody wants to continue the conversation, please email Pat. And I dropped his email in the chat, so you should be able to find it. Again, the replay link will be up hopefully today, but we'll say by tomorrow, just in case it takes a little bit longer to load. I'm going to drop my email in there as well. Feel free to ask any questions, or if you need directed in any sort of way. And then lastly, what I'll say is our next webinar is actually going to be through waiver sign next month. So it's going to be about AI and waivers. So it's going to be really interesting. For more information, you could visit the link I just sent over. Awesome, guys. Well, with that, I don't see any other questions that came through. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Pat.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Awesome.
Have a great
Enjoy
day.
the rest of your week. Bye, guys.